Okay, so somebody posted a YouTube comment that the supremacy clause means that the secret memo that was released about ICE masked government thugs being able to kick in people's houses without a warrant and haul people off to secret detention centers where they're getting tortured and disappeared. Um, is the is legal because of the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution, and obviously, well, the point is that the Bill of Rights, the supremacy clause, just means that the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law, and the Bill of Rights limits what the government can do to individual people in the U.S., whether they're citizens or not citizens. And the problem is that the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution and the Contracts Clause was used by corrupt judges to then create a precedence that a corporation is legally a person. So this whole fixation on illegal aliens or illegal people ignores what a legal person is. And a legal person, as it currently stands, is protected by the Bill of Rights based on the judicial precedents, but the attorney generals still have the legal right to revoke corporations because when the United States was created, the king was or the queen chartered corporations as the sovereign of the land, and the people were subjects of the sovereign. But the United States made sure that the people were sovereign instead of the king or queen, and so the people issue the charters of corporations, and therefore the people can revoke the charters. So basically, the legal system has tried to create a runaround for this sovereignty by arguing that corporations are legal people protected by the Bill of Rights. And there's a great organization that's focused on this called POCLAD, Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy. And I met the founder of that organization, and then Richard Grossman back in 1996 in Chicago when we were protesting the corporate control of the Democratic Party. And then I was connected with a local lawyer who was working in the AG, the Attorney General's office, back around the same time, and he gave me research on Minnesota, and then I passed that on to my one of my office managers, who then went on. I was doing data entry for the Get Out the Vote for Keith Ellison's first election in Minnesota. This was back like 20 years ago. So I did meet Keith Ellison briefly at a local restaurant because he was friends with the owner of the restaurant, and I was friends with the owner, a Ghanaian restaurant. So we met briefly, and then my office manager was hired, or he was actually like the data entry. I don't know, I can't remember his position, but he ended up being hired as Keith Ellison's office manager because I did all the data entry to get Keith Ellison elected the first time. You know, the Get Out the Vote data entry, you have to be real fast, and I did the work, but my manager took the credit apparently. And he got hired, and all good for him. But I was downwardly mobile and he was upwardly mobile, because I knew that the whole system was corrupt because of this corporate legal person problem. And I gave my research to my friend, who then went on to work for Keith Ellison. I don't know if he passed it on to Keith Ellison, but I have contacted the AG's office. My dad, having been I actually wrote Keith Ellison a letter, or, I wrote the office a letter, because my dad was the chief deputy officer, the assistant attorney general back in the late 60s. And he wrote the procedural manual for the Minnesota Attorney General's office, which is basically, I found that in the archives of the Minnesota Historical Society. And so I got a copy of it sent to me as a PDF, and so I have it on file. You can't really read it because it's like an old photostat copy from the 60s, but essentially my dad wrote, he wanted to make sure the best lawyers got hired for the Minnesota Attorney General's office. And he told my mom, he complained how the office at the time was not up to par. That's why he wrote this procedural manual, to make sure they had good trial lawyers and all that. And that's why he was appointed by the Attorney General at the time. And then my dad was also he was the chair for the Citizens League that wrote a report that then was used in the governor's race. And Time magazine featured Minnesota as what they called the Minnesota Miracle, based on the report that my dad shared, basically switching the funding of education in Minnesota to be based on a progressive income tax instead of the local property tax. And that was a big, like, structural change in the Minnesota tax system that helped Minnesota become a progressive tax state. And the problem was that my dad was Republican, even though he chaired this report for a progressive taxation of education. And so then his attorney general ran for governor against that Citizens League report. And then the Democratic governor supported the Citizens League report. So it put my dad in kind of a awkward position, because, this whole obsession with owning the libs and the Democrats and all that. I mean, I have a master's degree in liberal studies, because that's the definition of liberal, means you believe in individual human rights based on the law, a law, governed republic. That's what being a liberal means. So to be against the liberals is basically like, this corporate state fascism is against liberalism. So anyway, it's a deep problem in the legal system. It goes back to Platonic philosophy, as I've detailed in my 2012 book. So when I first got arrested in 1994, a group of cops passed me on the sidewalk. I was holding the sign. One of them ripped the sign out of my hands. I got the cop's badge number, and then I was going to file a freedom of speech violation. My dad supported that lawsuit because he agreed, in the liberal individual human rights. But there was no witness, and so the lawyer, he had gotten me out of jail for the arrest, but he never filed any First Amendment violation lawsuit against the cops. But that was over 30 years ago, and obviously things have just gotten worse. And I did get arrested 8 times protesting against the U.S. empire imploding. In 1996, I called it imperial implosion. I had a free zine called The Evil Empire, referring to the United States. But essentially, it's this Platonic philosophy. It's now globalized as Western technology, whether it's Marxism or the left, or it doesn't matter. It's all Western Platonic philosophy. And that's what my 2012 book goes into. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, as far as, people trying to claim that the Bill of Rights is not the supreme law of the land, but the supreme law means that people, that basically there's this idea that protesters are not real Minnesotans, that they must be from out of state, or they're secretly being paid by George Soros, who's Jewish and blah blah blah. It's like there's this. My 2012 book goes into the anti-Semitism and how it's deeply based in Platonic philosophy and eugenics, and so there's this structural, basically like a subconscious drive to so-called modern industrial civilization, and the drive is in the mathematics. It's in the logic that people learn in phonetic based language, and therefore it's tied into religion. And yeah, so um my dad went to NYU law school, and he got accepted to Harvard Law School, but he didn't get a full scholarship there, so he went to NYU, got a Ford Foundation, which the CIA had to supervise, and he was tied in with the Reader's Digest founder, who supported my dad privately for NYU. And the Reader's Digest founder was part of the CIA Cold War committee against Europe, and so there's a long history to this stuff. That like when Jesse Ventura was governor, he was supporting Cargill in Cuba, and I had to contact him to point out that Cargill is actually the world's largest quote unquote legal person with offices in 70 countries worldwide, and they all do derivative speculative trading through Switzerland. And Cargill dumped grain into Somalia at 1/6 the local farm price when the farmers controlled Mogadishu. So that's how it works. That's how that real empire works. And they're owned by 14 billionaires, and they're getting billions of dollars in government subsidies and welfare. So that's the real fraud that needs to be exposed and revoked and all that. The corporate charter of Cargill should be revoked. And so this is what does not get covered in the corporate media. They just try to dehumanize people and all that, and people like to brown nose the elite and hide behind the elite and hopefully the elite will help them out and that kind of thing, and think that corporations are so efficient and everything. And but that's just this religion of technology. And so yeah, I'm proud of Minnesota, the activism that and the community support and everything. But anybody who watches faux news, they're just like obsessed with Antifa is gonna attack us, and whatever faux news is cranking out that Soros is secretly paying the protesters and blah blah blah. Um, so yeah, they're like, I like people. There's this like bloodlust rage from faux news that we gotta not just own the libs, but basically, it's like they're saying the conditions in Minnesota are the worst it's been since the Civil War in terms of the struggle between a state and the federal government. But in this case, the conditions have been reversed. Um, so that's been going on a long time, where the political machine has made compromises with the federal government in terms of this corporate state fascism that was slavery, and the laws in the US being based on this divide and conquer, structural racism. So that was built into the real estate code, the property contracts with being structural racism and stuff like that. That goes like literally, I discovered the language in like the house I grew up in, the mortgage language was originally from the black slave laws of the early 1700s or late 1600s in Virginia. Like they literally lifted the same language to create these racist property laws in Minnesota. So you can see there's a direct like that's how the U.S. was founded. It was a settler, colonial, imperial country. So that ever since Bacon's rebellion in 1676, there's been this divide and conquer legal system set up um, that originally was based on the charters, the corporate charters as the colonies, and then that got transferred